Welcome to Inside Sponsorship, the show that provides sponsorship professionals with advice, insights and news so they can maximise their commercial programs and achieve best practice.
Sponsorship is a key marketing strategy for many airlines right around the world, and we often see them sponsoring high-profile sports who have big and global TV audiences and reach. But increasingly, we are seeing airlines add or increase non-sports properties to their portfolio, and one of those airlines is Etihad Airways, a truly global airline, not just in terms of status, but also the way they approach their sponsorships. And joining me on the show to discuss sponsorship is Simon Hawke, Manager, Sponsorship at Etihad Airways, who is responsible for leading the airline's sponsorship program in Australia. It's a great chat and some great insights into how they structure and approach their sponsorships, particularly what Simon explains is their 3 Fs. Welcome to episode 47 of Inside Sponsorship. I'm your host, Daniel Oyston. Wherever you are in the world, whatever your role is, be it rights holder, brand or agency side, it is awesome to have you listening into the show. It's also great to hear from you, even if it's just to say hi, because that means a shout out on the show. And a shout out and a huge thanks to Stephanie Martin, who got in contact via LinkedIn to nominate Pat Gallagher as a guest on the show. Stephanie is Managing Director and co-founder of BFWD. She's a storyteller and a brand strategist, author, big game, bigger impact, and a professor. Sounds very busy. And interestingly, Stephanie worked with Pat as VP Marketing and Communications for the San Francisco Bay Area Super Bowl 50 Host Committee. And Pat was the Executive Vice President, Partnership and Communications for the Super Bowl 50 Host Committee. And Pat's going to join us on the show in the coming week. So a shout out to Stephanie. Hope you are well. And thanks again for dobbing Pat in to come on the show. We are certainly very much looking forward to it. Another shout out goes to John Pugh, who's Manager Commercial Solutions at Nielsen Sports. And John also connected via LinkedIn and wrote, "Just heard the podcast for the first time. I listened into the Rebecca Stevens episode. Great stuff. I work with Rebecca and she always has great insights on things." Thanks, John. Yes, I also enjoyed hearing from Rebecca, and lots of our other listeners have also commented on the great episode as well. John, I hope you are well and thanks for getting in touch. This episode, we're playing catch up a little bit. We kind of got off schedule when we decided to release episode 45 and cut together some of the best bits of the show so far. So to catch up and make sure we get all of the content in, I've recorded 2 of Sam Irvine's blog chats. The first is about his insights from his recent trip to New Zealand for the Sponsorship Summit. Here's Sam. Sam, you've been away.
I've been a lucky man.
Yeah? Anywhere nice? Fiji, Bali.
I think last time we spoke, I'd just come back from Fiji.
Had you?
Yeah, and I was saying how good the kids were on the flight. Not. So when I get to travel by myself, it's not such a bad thing.
No, Mrs. Irvine, it's very hard work. But you did go somewhere nice. You went to New Zealand.
Yeah,
I love going to New Zealand.
Yeah, I've been there a few times actually. In my past life, I worked within rowing, so there was lots of good events and a really good course over there, world champs, etc. So I've seen a bit of New Zealand, both islands, and Auckland. Quite a nice place. Harder to get around than I thought. It's almost like a poor man's Sydney. I apologise for anyone who takes offence of that, but
there's more hills in Auckland than Sydney.
It's much nicer than Sydney. It's not as painful, but I was losing my patience with the Ubers. I'll give you that.
Really?
I just expected it to be as easy as Canberra to get around, so I was very naive.
But it is very chilled. I love going there. Even though you go there for work, I always feel a little bit relaxed when I'm there.
I love Kiwis, and I hope they love us. And I'm certain there's times when Aussies don't do ourselves too proud in other countries.
Well, we keep losing the rugby, so that helps with the relationship.
Well, we just won, and no one wanted to talk about it. Not a soul wanted to talk about the rugby. But no, you're right. The people over there, it has a relaxed vibe. It definitely does.
And you were over there for?
I was over there to see some really key clients that we've got. We've got some wonderful clients based all over New Zealand, but some great ones located in Auckland and Waikato region. But there was also a fantastic conference/summit called the Sponsorship Summit, run by a conference crew over there. So that was really cool.
And as you got on the plane, you've had a bit of a think about the couple of days that you're in Auckland and that conference/summit. that you attended, and you pulled together some key learnings for us.
Well, I knew, knowing the two of the directors I work with really closely, who I work for, were going to say to me, "What'd you get out of it? Was it worth a while? Was it money well spent, etc." So I knew I was going to have to think about it anyway. But I was sitting there, 3 nights away from the kids. What did I get out of it? What did
apart from 3 nights away from the kids?
And love you, Rochelle. And so I wonder. I was sitting in the Qantas lounge going, what did I get out? What did I provide back as well? So not just in a one-way transaction. And for me, there were 5 really sort of key things that I'd identified that this conference helped provide, but also that experience of being in New Zealand as well helped me provide.
Cool. Let's jump into it. What's the first one?
For me, it was collaboration within the region is key. Now, Aussies and Kiwis, we have such a similar culture around. We're pretty chilled out. We're pretty relaxed, but we also want to be best of breed. We also want to be as professional as possible, and we're quite close. Like it's a 2-hour flight from Sydney, 2.5, 3 hours flight from Sydney. So geographically, it makes sense that we start to work together
because we are isolated as a region, right? Like we're in the Southeast Asia, Australasia region, whatever the title is, but we're kind of stuck down in the corner by ourselves.
Oh, definitely. And I think there are so many things we can learn from each other, and we can work in this same space, whether it's a brand or a rights holder or an agency, that we don't need to be reinventing the wheel. We can really learn from what gets done in different sports from different regions, because New Zealanders do a really great job around activating with banks, is what I really noticed when I was over there. Financial institutions are really sort of savvy, and they don't have to be the big ANZ banks and things like that. But at the same time, we also have the similar population where we're quite digital savvy. We're all keen to learn. We're all keen to sort of be part of the wider picture. And I think that if Australians and New Zealanders could work out not just conferences to attend with each other, but how we can do, more trade summits, or we could do more travelling that involves big key events, then I think both regions will really develop and benefit from it.
Very good. Collaboration is the key. That sounds like you've led with a big, important one. That's good. Second, no matter the industry, we can all learn from each other.
So it wasn't a sport sponsorship summit, which for me was great because you could actually really learn from the arts, from government, from agencies, from charities, all those types of sectors that normally, if you're involved as a sports right holder, you don't really have many touch points with. And they're really doing some really cool stuff. We got to hear about a really great activation piece that a local council did around street art and things like that. And when you get a chance, jump on the Sponsorship Summit website and check it out, because it was a really cool presentation. And you sit back, and my background is all sport. So to be able to sit back and go, hang on, a council who's really under-resourced here can put together a really cool event like this that grabs attention, that grabs likes, that grabs, newspaper headlines, then surely we can learn from those as sports, we can learn from agencies, we can learn from all those types of things. So.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting. I find sponsorship is quite an insular industry, and then sport itself is an insular industry. But I went to the sponsorship summit that you went to. I went last year, and my favourite presentation was actually from the lady from New Zealand Ballet. I thought it was fantastic. I learnt heaps of different things. So it is key to look outside your area. As you said with your first point, collaborate if you can, but even just looking at other areas, you can learn so much more rather than just trying to do if you're in arts, just look at arts, or if you're in sport, just looking at sport, or if you're in a charity, just looking at charities. Don't just follow, go and look at other areas that have sponsorship and see what you can learn and adapt from them.
And we joke a little about this in the office, about that term, but we're different. And a lot of the time that's has negative connotations with it, right? Oh, but we're different. That doesn't apply to us. And what we should be taking out of it is, we are different. So we can use that in a different way. We're not necessarily copying or and to credit Sean Callanan, still with pride, is that these are things that where you see best of breed in arts, or you see best of breed in government space, then you are different enough to be able to develop that and sort of tweak it to make it worthwhile in your sponsorship space.
just adapt it. It shouldn't be they're doing A, B and C, and you say, well, A, B and C wouldn't work for us, but B, C and D might. Don't just dismiss things. See how you can adapt them.
No, definitely.
All right. So no matter the industry, we can all learn from each other. What's the third one?
rights holders still need to have the tools to draw out key information from the brands. Now, one could assume that because we're in a room, a big sort of conference space, we're all there for the right reasons. Well, hopefully we are. We're all there to learn, we're all there to talk, we're all there to share ideas, that perhaps either a proposal might just fall on a brand's lap, or they might start to tell you all the key areas that you need to focus your proposal on, etc. And it definitely isn't always the case. Now, just because a brand has sent a representative of theirs to a summit doesn't mean that, one, they're crying out for rights holders to throw proposals at them, or two, that's the right person you need to have a chat with either. So that might not even be the right person to sort of give you the information you need. But there were a couple of sessions there where there was opportunities for the brands really to open their doors and no holds barred, give the rights holders some real key sort of insight into what they should be doing or what they might be doing wrong. And it didn't feel like the brands really took it or grabbed the bull by the horns in that space. So it still became apparent to me that we still need to have the key. I say if you're a rights holder, still need to have those keys to unlock those doors. You need to know the right questions to ask, the right people to approach, the right time to do it as well. It might not be at lunchtime at a conference. It might be get the right details, go and take them out for coffee next week, etc.
It's an interesting point because rights holders would quite often be sitting back and saying things like, yeah, but if the brands told me more and they shared more, then I'd be able to give them better proposals and help them more. But it makes the assumption that they actually need your help, that they don't have a marketing plan, which includes sponsorship, it makes the assumption that isn't working well and they need you as a rights holder to come in and help them.
And save them.
That's right. So they don't need to share this information because they don't have a problem they're trying to solve. Yes, they always want to be doing better, but if life's pretty good, they're not going to invite heaps and heaps of proposals from people that they don't need. They get enough of those already, don't they? So
find a way to show you can value add without being a hassle, I guess, is sort of my point there. Was just because they're at this conference or just because they're in this space doesn't always mean it's an open shop front.
Yeah, you talk about taking them out to coffee and all that sort of stuff. It is still a long game. It's not just because you get the opportunity in front of someone that you got to try and get that shot right there and then. Okay, number 4.
Digital is still the sleeping giant of sponsorship. And it feels like it still is, all right, especially in our region. We hear some really cool stuff over in the US, some stuff in the UK that they're doing around VR or AR. And you know, we just really need to start to focus on ticking some small boxes here. And that might be things like using Snapchat better, which hopefully we're going to hear about sort of soon.
We are. Do you know that there's a...
No, I didn't actually. That was a complete accident.
I think the next show is going to be on Snapchat.
There we go. So using, the filters and being cool with that in that space, being really smarter around the use of Facebook and using all the filters you can in there by identifying the data you need, right? So being geo-targeted, all those types of things that we rights holders at the absolute top level are doing quite well, but that mid to lower tier in the right holder space in Australia and New Zealand are still quite immature in this space in digital. And I think that's where that's what provides so much potential in this space still.
It is tough though, isn't it? Particularly for the small and medium rights holders that don't have big budgets or don't have 3 or 4 people in their sponsorship or commercial team to be able to take advantage of 48,000 different channels that everyone says, you should be on Snapchat and you should be doing more with video. And you're like, I haven't got the time or the resources. So it is tough, but we do need to spend time analysing where our time and our resources are best spent. But again, it's always going to be a challenge. And it's a changing
game too, isn't it? It's always every 6 months you could say, well, that's no longer a priority in that digital space. Let's move in here over here. So
exactly right. Okay, number 5.
Size doesn't always matter. Now, we got to see in this conference, we got to see some really cool presentations. We got to see some really cool videos put together. We got some really wicked ideas from some really small rights holders or some really small brands. By small, I mean comparatively compared to a Nike or compared to a really huge rights holder like the AFL, right? So these rights holders and these brands were able to sit down and go, here's how we were smart with our time, with our resources. Here's how we identified working with people who are best of breed in this space. So we picked out this agency to work with because they were really good in this space and they provided a good working relationship. It wasn't because we're the biggest and best and we can throw lots of cash at it, or that we've got all the creative directors in the world that can throw lots of bright ideas at that. They were smarter and they were more nimble. So that for me was really heartening to see that it's not just really big stories. We're not just hearing about NAB and their mini legends sort of footy activation, which we all sort of might know and love. You can see some really cool smaller banks in New Zealand that are focused in regions have run, put together TV shows by themselves around banking, but sold it really, really well and involved sponsorship in that space, etc.
Very good. So just running over those again, collaboration within the region is key. Number 2, no matter the industry, we can all learn from each other, which I think is probably my favourite. Number 3, rights holders still need to have the tools to draw key information out of brands. 4 is digital is still the sleeping giant of sponsorship. I'm going to put in brackets there. It's always going to be a challenge. And number 5, size doesn't always matter. You're looking forward to going to the summit next year?
Yeah, definitely. I think it should be really cool. The part that I really enjoyed about it was a relatively small room, but it meant that you could get around, you could identify who you wanted to talk to. It's a 2-day event, so you could use day 1 to sort of take it all in, and day 2 you could be quite smart with who you want to talk to or what you're hoping to get out of it, those types of things.
Putting you on the spot, what's one thing you would change about it? What would make it better for next year?
It would probably be at least getting an attendee list slightly beforehand, even if it was only a day beforehand.
Yep.
We never actually even received a full attendee list even while we're there, so you're sort of looking around, you're on LinkedIn checking out profiles and trying to work out who
Stalking.
might be who. Yeah. Whereas, well, you could have been more strategic beforehand and sort of set up some outside coffees as well beforehand, which would have been ideal.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
As I mentioned earlier, we are playing catch up a little bit with discussing Sam's recent blogs, so we get to hear from him again, and this time Sam's been pondering activations, and as part of his ongoing series, he's written a letter to his younger self with some advice around activations. Here's Sam. Sam, welcome to the second segment of the show, because we're going to put this in the same show because we're a bit behind.
So I apologise if anyone is sick of hearing my voice already.
Welcome to the Sam Irvine Show. But part of some of the blogs that you write for SponServe, sometimes we frame them as a bit of an ongoing series or theme where you write a letter to yourself. So in this ongoing series, you ponder how should we say this? Your past life. I mean, you're still alive, but your past career as a commercial manager at a rights holder, and we look at the things, or you look at the things that you wish you had known then. So this is the advice that a wiser, older, smarter, more organised Sam,
more wrinklier, yeah,
would give to his younger self to help him in his job.
Definitely.
And you've been pondering something recently, which was the catalyst for writing this letter.
Definitely. And for me, it was around activations. And it's such a key word that we all sort of throw around in the commercial space. And it can mean a million different things. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to a rights holder as a brand. And I sort of found this out the hard way in a few different sort of examples I've given in the blog as well. So for me, being able to sit back and see some really cool things that are happening at different events or online, or even through television or broadcast, I was sort of inspired to sort of write down a few words and give myself some tips from in the past. And
you've done that by posing or framing some questions that a commercial manager and a brand should be talking to each other or asking each other.
No, definitely. And so really they should be. There was, for me, 4 key sort of things you should be trying to sort of pose or at least outline or put air some dirty laundry in a way sometimes as well, right? Was around 4 really key things. And the first one for me was, what are you trying to achieve by having an activation in your partnership, right? If you're a rights holder or your brand, either way, why is an activation, whatever it may be, whether it look like a physical activation, something online, but why is it important to your partner? Why is it important to the brand? Or why is it even important to you to be part of that mix of what you're offering in a relationship? So are they trying to have a physical presence at an event, or are they trying to leverage other partnerships into one big opportunity? So really just tease out of that partner why and what they're trying to do with having an activation as part of it.
There's an example that I quite often give in meetings and when I'm meeting people and we're just talking about sponsorship. I may have shared it on the podcast in the early episodes. I can't actually remember, but the example was somebody that I know sold a sponsorship to somebody. They had a big event coming up. That brand had an activation at that event, and this person rang up the brand to say, just checking in what you're going to be doing for the activation on Saturday or next Saturday. And the brand was, what? And he said, the activation where you put up a tent or you do a
face
painting or pass the ball or whatever it might be, count the jelly beans, whatever it might be. And they said, well, to be honest, we didn't actually know what an activation was when we got the sponsorship. You just seemed really keen and that it'd be really beneficial for us, which it would have been. But there was an assumption there that they knew what an activation was and that it was going to help them achieve some goals. So I think it is important to say, what are you trying to achieve? Because if it's community engagement, yes. If it's brand awareness, yes. If it's networking, probably not.
No.
If it's
leads,
if it's a relationship building, probably not. Maybe, depending on how you execute it. So it is important to think about what are you trying to achieve and then work backwards. Yep. All right.
I think also then and that sort of brings us to the next sort of point I've made is what resources are available. So if you're just assuming that the brand's going to be the one doing all the work or they're going to engage an agency, then you're already on the back foot there, right? You haven't communicated with them. All right, who's doing what? What does it look like? Who's engaging? Let's put a WIP document together just for this activation piece, etc. So are they financial resources, physical resources, hands on the job, etc.? What's available from either side? Really are key. You need to sit down and identify that from early days.
And it's probably, it could be hard at that point, right? You say you're going to have an activation at the grand final or the community day or whatever. What would you think you'd want to do? And they're like, well, we don't know just yet. Don't park that conversation. Raise some of the things that they should be thinking about. So, for example, a lot of people put up marquees and then have staff come and look after those marquees. Would you have staff available? We don't need to know how many staff, and you don't have to have a marquee, but you don't want to get to a point where they go, well, we put up the marquee. Are you sending your staff to man it for us? No. So at least try and get some of those things that they should be considering around resources in their head, even if it's not clear at that point in time.
And I think too, identifying what barriers, as you sort of raised a bit there, what barriers are there currently in place that might make this a difficult thing to achieve? So if it's a key weekend when all their staff are taking time off, or if there's other events that they run, if there's a big sponsor and they sponsor other sort of sports or teams in that region, then they might not necessarily be available. So then you can be quite savvy and go, all right, we don't need hands on deck. Let's be smarter. Let's have more of an online presence in that weekend, etc. So,
yep, good points. Number 3.
Who's a creative one? I'm not usually, right? So normally I would sit down with that brand. And number 3,
I got you covered. That's
I have? Yeah, that's definitely your space compared to me, right? And that was a hard one because often you're either put on the spot by the brand or you're trying to be the leader in this space and go, let's come with a really cool pass the ball, or let's do an online competition that involves ambassadors and et cetera, right? Now, if that's not your strength, don't hide behind that. Let's be open and honest about it, and let's either, one, engage an external party to help with this, or if that's not really available, engage others within your organisation and the brand's organisation that might have strengths in those spaces, collaborate, come up with some cool ideas. Don't sit there and think that you have to be the one that comes up with these award-winning ideas.
I like that. Maybe pizzas and beers in the boardroom and just get everybody in there and some white paper and
just spitball, and you never know what can come out. You might have some really creative people that are in operational roles that can really sort of help in this space. So.
Very much no idea is a bad idea at this stage. Let's just see what we've got.
No, exactly.
Okay, so what ideas do we have as number 3? Number 4?
How would you like the outcomes reported on this? So one, really identifying what are the key outcomes that you want to achieve from this. Is it brand awareness? Is it community engagement? Is it sort of building a bigger database to communicate to? So really identifying that from the outset, then asking the simple question, how and when do you want to be informed of this outcome of this activation? It shouldn't just form part of your general chit-chat or your general catch-up. What it should be is, if it's going to be something important in the relationship, it needs to have a separate meeting set for it at the end, or it needs to have its own little miniature report run if that's important to them. And it should be. So I think really identifying, all right, what's a key time? We know our end of season report's coming up in 3 months' time, but it's not going to form part of that. It needs to be done before, and etc. And what are the metrics you want to hear from us? How many people were at the event on the day, or how many click-throughs did you get, etc. Right? Those are all key things we need to report. But how do we then link that back to their outcomes as well?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important question to ask, because it would seem to me that a lot of rights holders would put pressure on themselves to report around an activation, but maybe pulling together a whole lot of information that the brand doesn't actually need to know. And you're stressing, you think the more stuff we give them, the better it'll look.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if we just think about it, you step back, these should be aligned to your SMART objectives. So one, the outcomes should be measurable and we know what we're trying to achieve. We might not have a SMART goal directly linked to this activation. Might be a number of benefits being utilised across the portfolio and across the years. But if it's something as simple as, for example, the Weet-Bix triathlons that the kids do here in Australia. They travel all the way around Australia and the kids turn up to the local events, and it's a non-competitive, it's a participation event. But they've got some big brands there where you're filling in forms to go into the draw. Now, the brand probably really only wants to know how many kids participated. And how many people do you think came through the door? And you go, well, over the 10 events, there was, 10,000 kids that participated, and that roughly equals 30,000 people because, mums and dads come and grandma comes and all that sort of stuff. And they go, great, that's all we need to know because we've got the forms. So you don't have to be stressing about putting together this massive presentation and all this information about it was in 10 locations and 56% were female. And they probably don't care because their activation was specifically driven around building a database and getting people. Right?
No, exactly. And I think really...
But sorry to interrupt, but you're never going to know unless you actually have that conversation with the brand. Don't assume that more is actually going to be better for you.
No, definitely. And I think too, going on to that, having that conversation, talk about the negatives too. Right? Be a little bit frank and go, we don't think this worked, or we didn't give ourselves enough time, or we'd have it in a different position if it's a physical activation, etc. So just being frank and open and go, all right, this is what we would do next year. So don't come to them necessarily with problems, come to them with solutions on things that you thought were potentially negatives from the day.
Very good. I feel, if you'd like to go and read that full letter from Sam to himself, you can do so. Just head to sponserve.net. Sam, I feel that the younger you is better for this letter.
I'm definitely a better man than I was a few weeks ago.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Simon Hawke, Manager, Sponsorship at Etihad Airways, is responsible for leading the airline sponsorship program in Australia. As you'll hear, Simon is uniquely placed in the sponsorship industry, having worked all three sides of the triangle: rights holder, brand and agency. Simon manages the local portfolio in Australia for Etihad Airways, but needs to do so in the wider context and approach of a global airline whose head office is in the Middle East, yet has a strong sponsorship presence not just in Australia, but in the UK and North America as well. Here's Simon. Simon Hawke, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We always kick off with a few easy icebreaker questions just to ease you into the interview and obviously help the audience get to know you a little bit better. First icebreaker question is, if you could be anyone else in the world for the day, who would it be and why?
Well, I think a few things would be pretty good. I reckon with the Ashes coming up, I wanted to play cricket for England for a while. I wouldn't mind being Joe Root. I think that'd be pretty fun, unless it was a fielding day, of course. But yeah, I think that'd be a pretty good one.
Would you bat or bowl first in the first test?
I think you've got to bat.
Agreed.
And hopefully I'll be there.
Very good. Our second icebreaker question is, what was your first ever job?
My first job, when I was a teenager, I got roped in to do a silver service waiting job for a day. Only a day, because actually there are a few skills involved which I didn't end up having. It was things like balancing numerous champagne glasses on a tray and those sorts of things. So I was a silver service waiter. I think would be my first proper job.
There's nothing like easing into it.
Yeah.
Now, Simon, you've worked on all three sides of the sponsorship triangle. Can you tell us about your story so far?
Sure. So out of university, I tried to pursue a bit of a career in cricket, which sort of led me into the sports marketing world, and in an agency called Havas Sports and Entertainment, which was it looked after a whole load of the major partners for the ECB. So that was things like my initial job was looking after accounts such as Hugo Boss in England Cricket, AirAsia, looked at who did Man United and Formula One, BMI, Airlines for England Rugby, those sorts of things. And it was very much it's quite a commercial entity. We're working on behalf of clients and occasionally on behalf of rights holders. And I suppose that was because it was quite a small agency. I was you got access to and view of quite a lot of the processes quite early on. But that was very much, things like PR. I started off, I was very much in a PR space. So it was quite good. I used to enjoy, I was working on PR days with England cricketers, trying to get things into the various papers. If a photo went in, it was a success. If it didn't, it was a failure sort of thing. And then I was there for about 4 years. By the end, it was, in the space of managing budgets, and you're getting to work out brokering contracts for the rights holders with ECB strategy, etc. But and after that, I moved on to another agency role. I was at some place called MEC Access, which is the sponsorship arm of MEC, which is a big media agency, part of the WPP group. So that was I was in the global solutions section. That was more of a global account manager role. And so that was more strategic. So whereas in the first one, it was very hands-on account management. This was linking into things such as, looking after European-wide accounts, or even further. I looked after Amlin Insurance, their European rugby sponsorship. They're title sponsors of one of the major competitions over there. Xerox, we looked after their European sponsorship business, things like Cirque du Soleil that they did at the time. And it was, I suppose, a lot more stuff around being strategic, working very closely with research. We had big access to those sorts of research arms. And also there was a lot of science that went down behind the ideation process, coming up with ideas and that sort of thing. So it was when it was at still agency side, it was a bit different. And that was when I moved to Australia, and my first job here was with the Wallabies, where I was a senior partnerships manager within their team. So I looked after the major accounts such as Qantas, the broadcasters, Castrol at the time, those sorts of people, and also a number of other areas such as sort of things I would look after would be the management of the player appearances, the NRC commercial program for a while there, those sorts of things. So and now here I am. I am the manager of sponsorship here in the region for Etihad Airways, and it's taken me onto the third side of the triangle, and I've been here for about a bit over a year and a half.
So it's a really interesting journey, having worked all three sides of the triangle. What are some of the differences that you see?
Well, certainly in the specific roles, everyone's got the same fundamental aim, I suppose, in we're trying to create an interesting use of sponsorship, or an effective use of a sponsorship. But yeah, there definitely were some different onuses on how the role was shaped. I suppose rights holder, I suppose you're on the front line of the commercial versus the on-field performance line. So it's working closely with the team management, working out what can we realistically deliver, how can we make sure we're not affecting team performance, working with the coach, those sorts of things. It's also very much more in the logistical side of it. So how can we physically deliver these rights? And even coming up, I suppose, with working at what's available, coming up with things. So I suppose that's slightly different than if you look at the agency, which again is different to a brand in that they're on the side, which is, again, actually spending the money. But on the agency side, I suppose you're in the space where you're very much needing to justify yourself. So it's a very proactive space, I guess. It's all significantly more idea brainstorms, pitching, putting yourself forward for awards, I suppose, that sort of self-promotion piece, which is, a huge part of that piece. And then in the brand, again, I suppose now on it, you're the side where it's a cost to the business. So I think there's just, to a much larger extent, you are being asked the question and asking yourself the question, is this the best use of my money? And how is that tracking back to the specific objectives?
I think that's an interesting thing for our listeners who are on the rights holder side to be always keeping front of mind that brands are under pressure to be justifying their spending internally about whether it's helping achieve their goals. Now, Simon, you told me the other day that your first day on the job at the Wallabies was the day that the Lions tour landed. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with rugby, that's a once every 12-year tour to a specific region. It's a huge occasion. Tell us about what that was like.
Well, I suppose it was. I mean, it was a little. I sort of was in the deep end in a certain sense because I was looking after, for example, DHL, who were the naming rights of the tour, and Qantas and a few of the others. But I suppose on a positive, it wasn't really. We certainly weren't in the strategic stage. You know, we were in very much delivery. How are we going to do? How are we going to do all this? So almost, it was just quite an enjoyable time to be there, and it's quite good to in a job like that to join at the busiest time almost, because it was probably never that busy again in the whole time I was there because it was such a huge event. So I mean, in a sense, I was almost, as a fan anyway, I was getting, you know, the best view on the pitch out of nowhere because, you know, the job came up very fast in the end. So I mean, it was very enjoyable, and I mean, the skill that it was in terms of what I had to do. It was a lot of the things that I knew about anyway. There were nuances and things, but it was certainly more enjoyable than anything.
The burning question is, as an Englishman but an employee of the Wallabies, who are you cheering for?
Well, my dad's actually a New Zealander, and my mum's a Scot, and I'm English, so I've always had issues with working out who to support in rugby. But I genuinely, as when I did work for the Wallabies, I did genuinely support the Wallabies. It was, you have a vested interest. You get to know the players. I honestly can say I was supporting the Wallabies.
Correct answer. Well done. Now, can you give us a lay of the land in terms of what sponsorships Etihad have in place at the moment and that you're managing?
Sure. So in this market, we have down in Melbourne, we've got Etihad Stadium. We have Melbourne City Football Club in the A-League. We have the Melbourne Recital Centre, and we also have Sport Australia Hall of Fame. Up in Sydney, we have Sydney Opera House. And we also have deals with IMG Fashion Week around the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week, and also taste festivals. And there's a taste festival in both Sydney and in Melbourne.
And with those sponsorships, what is Etihad generally looking to achieve with them? What are the objectives?
Well, I suppose to give some context as well, I mean, the airline is, there's been a bit of a journey through the way that sponsorship has worked for the airline. It's a reasonably young airline, so from 2003 launching, and more recent than that, 10 years now in this market. So, you know, the initial role of sponsorship was a big brand builder. So that meant moving into different markets and sponsoring various different properties, which had great relevance locally, and they all did a fantastic job in their own rights in terms of that brand role. As the airline has gone on a bit, the focus obviously, as with all brands, changed slightly in that it's more into a second phase of trying to tell a bit of a story. So rather than having what it meant going to different markets was there were lots of different properties that didn't necessarily relate to each other in terms of one global promotion. So we've got in place a bit of a global strategy around 3 Fs, which is football, food and fashion. And all of that is underpinned by Abu Dhabi. And so what that does is it gives us a bit of a global positioning in terms of our sponsorship offering, so that football is underpinned by our City Group partnerships. So that is most obviously Manchester City, which is obviously an enormous deal for us, huge global reach, genuine eyeball, millions of eyeballs on every single game. But it has a global angle in that we're also linked in a relevant way with New York, and also with Melbourne City as well. So that's football. then we've got fashion, which is IMG, which is an IMG deal, which takes us into fashion weeks all around the world, which has been New York, London, Milan, Berlin, Mumbai, Sydney. So a number of different events around the world. And all these events are, roughly the same. They have their tweaks market to market, but it's certainly a rough positioning on where we can promote ourselves. And that works a very nice positioning in terms of the brand and the right brand values, and also a good audience for us. It's a very flying industry. And then taste is all about, food is underpinned by taste, and that takes us into a huge number of other markets, which is all about driving our culinary onboard offering. So we have our in-flight chefs who come down and do live demos, and we're trying to promote, because a lot of our marketing, one of our angles is certainly pushing that we have a very high level of culinary offering with our 5-star chefs and a number of other things. So what that means is that we've moved from trying to promote, well, without throwing it, there's obviously going to be different dynamics, but that's just a slight step change in how it is. So there's now a global positioning on how we do that, and everything again is underpinned by Abu Dhabi. So Abu Dhabi is the hub of the airline, and a major part of the tagline is from Abu Dhabi to the world. So a major part of the whole remit of the airline is to promote that. So what we're trying to do therefore is primarily promote those brand assets, but then with a local market twist as well. So as I mentioned, there are all these other pieces that fit in, which also have great roles, like Etihad Stadium and Sydney Opera House. So these, and we can use them in various different ways in local activations to drive various messages. So, and in terms of the activations we do, we've got probably break the buckets down into 3 areas, which would be sales, client engagement, and then brand. And sales would sit as anything between selling, working with the right holder to arrive flights that they need anyway, to selling to their consumer databases, to even signing up Etihad guest members. Then client engagement obviously is use of hospitality and tickets, also events. That's a big part of what we do, engaging our important clients from all ends of the scale, trade and corporate. And then brand, that is really everything that's consumer facing in terms of the brand. So what are we doing? That includes things like social media content or working with the media and PR in any sort of way we might.
Fantastic answer. I love the whole framing around those 3 key pillars of football, fashion and food, and very clear on those 3 objectives, or the main ones that you're trying to achieve in sales, client engagement and brand. Through those 3 key focuses and those objectives, what are some of the activations that you're doing at the moment to help drive those objectives?
Well, from a brand side, so tying in with those 3S, we do have a lot of work and activity going around fashion. For example, we'll be the presenting part of the Australian Fashion Laureate Awards, which is happening on Thursday or tomorrow. And we've also, what the sort of thing we would do is we try and we'll have an angle in terms of what is our area of relevance, and often that is we fly in talent, and so we try and make sure that everything we can justify what we're actually promoting. So we might fly in, for example, last May at Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week in Sydney, we flew in Georgia Fowler, who's a Victoria's Secret model, and we also flew in Kim Ellery, who's a famous Australian designer. And through them, we use them for things like PR and various other bits and pieces, as well as creating content. So content, certainly at the moment, we're working closely with Sydney Opera House on a couple of big content pieces. There's a thing live in the market at the moment called Expand Your Horizons, where we're working closely with the team there to, I suppose, give other people the opportunity to expand their own horizons by winning flights with us. So I suppose ultimately it's trying to find a message that's relevant to the particular property that we can promote in some way. In terms of client engagement, we've got, there's obviously the hospitality, which is ongoing. We have a significant amount of tickets in market across the year, but we also create probably a whole series of events which are sort of level up, I suppose, from the hospitality, even where we try and create bespoke experiences, package up rights together. Maybe it'd be training sessions at Melbourne City. Maybe we'll bring in Sports Trade Hall of Fame members who are legends of Australian sport into various dinners, or we can use Etihad Stadium for various, changing room tours, the rest of it. So there's a whole list of events that we do across the year, upwards of 20 that we would do in that space. And then sales, a few of the examples, we got a lot of our activity will be related to inviting people to sign up to Etihad Guest to enter. So that sort of ties us into sales a bit. And we're exploring a thing called Ticket for a Ticket, which is a nice sales one where if you buy on us, we give you free tickets to a sponsorship property. So those are a few of the examples of what we're doing at the moment.
I think it struck me as interesting that when we're looking at budgets for activations, that one of the lucky things that you have in your back pocket is that you can probably fly people around to events and talent and all that sort of stuff for nothing, because you can just put it through the business.
Yeah, no, that is a benefit. I mean, there is a cost though. We sort of don't have a totally open book on that, but there's certainly it's a very fundamental thing that we can use. It's a very relevant thing as well.
How does your role fit into the Australian Etihad team overall? And you mentioned it before, obviously head office is in Abu Dhabi. What role does head office play in all of that?
So the way our sponsorship team is structured is that we have what we call regional sponsorship managers that report into head office. So we have an equivalent of me who sits in America and looks after the American market. We've got someone who sits in London, looks after the London market, and then I look after Australia and Asia. And we report into Abu Dhabi, where the head office is based, of course, and all senior management is based. They set, for example, the three Fs. All the major strategy pieces are set in that sense there. And my role is to lead the sponsorship program in this region and maximise the existing investments, I suppose, and develop a strategy to ensure we do achieve our objectives. This role was initially run out of HQ, but by giving it a local role, it's given us a bit of a better chance to get the right outcomes, because every market's different and Australia has its own specific quirks. And it's with it being such an important market for the airline and with such a big portfolio in the market, that was important. So I'm tasked with ensuring that we take advantage of all the local market opportunities. In terms of how closely to work with the actual team, a lot. So I've got regular communications with the senior team back in head office. I have to report back regularly on how everything's tracking. That links into sales, brand value, everything, and includes a couple of trips to Abu Dhabi a year where we'd have strategic sessions on what's going on. There's a whole team tracked with measuring and tracking results, so working with them on ongoing is very important. And then also working with the US and European people, that's also very important. So we do have a very huge global portfolio, which I haven't mentioned, but the likes of, well, I've mentioned a couple of them, but other things like the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix or those sorts of things. We do have access to other things that we work together to try and help each other out on. And then internally as well, I have a lot of work to do with with people sponsorship is really a platform for the business, I suppose, to try and reach their objectives. So I work very closely with people in sales, with people in media, with people in marketing to try and make sure that people are using the assets we've got in the right way, I suppose. Then externally, we've got a number of rights holders, and I work very closely with all of them on an ongoing basis.
Well, speaking about those rights holders and working with them on an ongoing basis, clearly sponsorships are best managed as partnerships. How much of an active role do you play in driving those partnerships versus leaving it to a rights holder or putting the responsibility on the rights holder to really drive the partnership?
Well, I would say that a lot of onus has to come from me in terms of and from the brand, I suppose, on in terms of objectives, and from there. So once that's clarified, and we might work out what would be a good year, what would mean success for the year. I wouldn't say that sometimes I would have specific ideas on what we're going to do, but often I'd say more than healthy to be opening it up and going, what are some good ideas here? Sydney Opera House in particular are very good at coming up with good ideas. So I would say that as long as there's a clarity on the specific objective, I think it's any ideas are welcome.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think I had Sam, one of our staff members, on the show earlier in this episode, talking about that exact same point. So, and we would agree with you. We talked about, or you nominated that there's those 3 Fs: the football, the food, and the fashion. I'm assuming your portfolio is not evenly split between those 3 pillars, but clearly 2/3 of those pillars are not sport related. What do you see as some of the key differences between sports sponsorships and non-sport sponsorships? So, around food and fashion, or anything else really?
Well, I think that the fundamentals are the same. I mean, you're doing them. The reasons for doing them are pretty much the same. But most likely, you're doing whatever it is you're doing to try and target a certain demographic. So, the demographic of person you're targeting is more than likely significantly different. I mean, there are some differences in that you don't get automatic, or often you don't get things like automatic brand media value in the same way as you would. It'd be less likely to have a broadcast element like in a sport. Plus, I find that the rights holder is a bit less likely to own the rights of the talent in the way that a club might. So, appearances, ambassadors might still and probably would play a big part in how you might want to activate, but you'd probably need to work on additional costs around that. So I'd say that fundamentally the same, but just probably things are that you're trying to reach someone different, and that allows you to, and you probably have to work a little bit harder occasionally. And but you spend less you're more than likely to spend less on the rights fee, I imagine, just as a general rule, which would leave, in theory, more for the activation fund, but which would allow you to do that. But yeah, you probably would have to have more of an onus on the activation fund.
You've worked both sides of the fence. If we put a fence between, even though we talk about sponsorships as being relationships, we still use the phrase on either side of the fence. But if we put a fence between rights holders and brand, you've worked on both sides. What is one thing that when you're on the rights holder side of the fence, you wished the brands understood or just got better about what you needed to do?
Well, I don't know if I'd say didn't get it as such, but I think I mean, a lot of what happens a lot of the time, say a brand's invested a big amount of money into a property, they don't really want to hear from you that they're not able to access the most high-profile player for their big TV shoot because he's got a sore toe or something. There's always those sorts of issues that come up, and most of the biggest issues I found, certainly working at the Wallabies, were based around player access. And I think it's less that they don't get it. It's just more that it's tough to you would go into a deal like that, and when you're spending that sort of money, sometimes a particular player can make a bit of a difference to a perception of a campaign. So I can see how a lot of onus is on that, but I suppose that often comes up as the biggest sticking point.
What about on the other side? Now you're on the brand side. What is something that you wish that when you're dealing with rights holders that they just understood a little bit better?
I think that probably comes back to objectives again. Occasionally, it might be that you want the rights holder to be very conscious of what you're trying to do, as opposed to any objectives they might have. But just being very clear on, and not trying to push their objectives as much, but understanding that, because all the brands will have coming from hugely different worlds half the time. and were often very different from what the rights holder is representing. So they do have their own internal challenges. So I suppose it would just be just that, understanding very specifically what the brand is trying to do and being conscious of that.
Tell us about one of your favourite activations, either one you've executed or one you've seen somebody else execute. What was it and why was it great?
Well, it actually was a great example at the AIU was the Samsung's slide liner.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that was. I mean, I was involved in that actually right at the beginning when the idea first came up. It wasn't actually attached to Samsung at the time, and it was, I suppose I think it's a great example because one, the idea is very, very good. No one had actually done that. There'd been best seats in the house, but there hadn't been a moving seat. But it took, so one on the rights holder side, it took, and I can confirm it took huge amounts of work to try and work through some logistical issues, from things like, blocking seats behind, covering other signage, taking into account international rugby union laws around health and safety and how close you go to the pitch, all those sorts of things. So huge amounts of extra work from the rights holder to actually make it happen. And then on the Samsung side, they invested, huge amounts of money and did a fantastic job in terms of promoting it across numerous channels, using it in TV ads, making it a fundamental part of their business. So I thought that was a fantastic example.
Yeah, I'd agree. I absolutely loved that idea when I saw it. As we spoke about before, you are someone who is unique, having worked all three sides of the sponsorship triangle. So I'm interested in where you think the industry is heading.
Well, I think that a few points probably. I think that, historically it's been very, very sport focused. I think that more and more, you'd probably say it's been reasonably sport and male dominated. Certainly getting less so, and I'd say that trend will continue. The growth of women's sports, example, for example, with us, in making huge investments into non-sports sponsorships. I think that will be a trend as sponsorship, it gets used as a tool to reach a less traditionally male demographic. I think the digital side of things will obviously affect the way that it all gets played out. How activations work, how do we actually reach people, what are the onuses on from brands and how they're using it. And then I'd say a big one actually would be in linking to the digital piece. I think that there'll become much more rigor in terms of how do people actually measure and the success in measuring activations in the digital space. I think at the moment it's actually quite tricky to get a proper view on how much value any sort of activation has done, because a lot of the value in theory goes into the digital world, whether that be Facebook or numerous digital platforms, that it's very hard to track and very hard to put an actual brand value on. So I think someone will work that out at some point, and that will allow brands to be a lot more clever in that space.
Very interesting. Fantastic chat, Simon. Very insightful. If people want to get in touch with you, connect with you on social media, etc., what can they do?
Yeah, always happy. LinkedIn's the best one for me.
Very good. Simon Hawke, Manager, Sponsorship in Australia. Thank you so much for taking us inside sponsorship at Etihad Airways.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed that chat with Simon, and I found the framing of their portfolio across those three Fs of football, food and fashion really interesting. I'm sure other brands approach their sponsorships in a similar way, but I've never heard them speak openly about it, so it was great to hear that. It was also interesting to hear how they are different yet align with each other somewhat and are executed to achieve those three core objectives, which are very clear: sales, client engagement and the brand. And as Simon mentioned, if you want to connect with him, LinkedIn is your best option, and there is a link in the show notes, or just search for Simon Hawke. That's about all we have time for episode 47. Don't forget to head to sponserve.net to read Sam's 2 blogs in detail. And of course, if you aren't getting the blogs or the podcasts direct to your inbox each week, then shoot me an email or sign up at sponserve.net. If you'd like a shout out on the show, just like Stephanie and John, just get in touch. I'll make it happen. I can't stress enough how cool it is for us here at Sponserve to hear from you, even if it's just to say, hey, my name is such and such and I work at ABC and I happen to listen to the show. So get in contact. If you want to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. Just search for Daniel Oyston or drop me an email at daniel@sponserve.net or on Twitter using the handle @sponserve. And of course, you can connect with Sam Irvine on LinkedIn or email using sam@sponserve.net. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. Just search for Sponserve. Until next time, I'm Daniel Oyston. Thanks for listening to Inside Sponsorship.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, blogs and resources, head to sponserve.net or search for Sponserve on Facebook, Twitter or LinkedIn.